The notification chime above Sullivan's salvage and repair had been broken for 3 months, which meant Jake only knew someone entered his shop when they cast a shadow over whatever he was working on. This time, the shadow fell across the 1967 Harley-Davidson engine he'd been rebuilding, a completely useless endeavor on a space station, but sometimes a man needed to work on something that made sense. "Be with you in a second," Jake muttered, not looking up as he carefully adjusted the timing chain. "If you're here about the Kelvin Industries warranty recall, I already told them I don't fix their cheap capacitors anymore. They can take their business to. I am not here about a warranty." The voice made him pause. It had an odd quality to it, like someone speaking through water, or maybe through one of those fancy universal translators that cost more than his shop made in a year. Jake set down his wrench and turned, wiping his hands on a rag that was arguably dirtier than his fingers. The woman standing in his doorway wore a cloak that seemed excessive even for new Cassiopeia Station, where the climate control had been stuck on Arctic breeze for the better part of a decade. The fabric looked expensive, the kind that shifted color depending on the angle, currently wavering between deep purple and midnight blue. Her face was mostly hidden by the hood, but he could make out pale skin and eyes that seemed to reflect the overhead lights in a way that made him think of cats. "Right, well, what can I do for you?" Jake asked, tossing the rag onto his workbench where it landed on a pile of similar rags, forming what he liked to think of as a textile mountain range. "Fair warning, I'm backed up about 2 weeks unless it's an emergency. And before you ask, everyone thinks their situation is an emergency." She reached into her cloak and withdrew something that made every tool in Jake's shop seem to vibrate slightly. It was about the size of a basketball, crystalline but not quite transparent, with something flowing inside it that looked like liquid starlight. Jake had been fixing ships for 15 years, ever since he'd inherited the shop from his grandfather, and he'd never seen anything quite like it. "This is a navigation core," she said, setting it carefully on his counter. The metal surface immediately frosted over beneath it. "It requires repair." Jake approached it slowly, pulling out his scanner. The device immediately started smoking. He set it aside with practiced calm. His equipment caught fire at least once a week. "Navigation core, huh? From what, exactly?" "Because this isn't matching any configuration in my database, and I've got schematics going back to the first Mars colonies." "It is a custom model." "Lady, my coffee maker is a custom model. This thing looks like someone crystallized a black hole and taught it to sing." He leaned closer, careful not to touch it. The air around it tasted like copper and ozone. "Where'd you say you were from?" "I didn't." "Fair enough." Jake grabbed a different scanner, an older model he'd modified himself with parts from a microwave and what might have been a gaming console from the 2090s. This one didn't catch fire, but it did display readings that made absolutely no sense. According to his equipment, the navigation core existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and was also somehow dairy-free. "Can you repair it?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that might have been desperation if desperation could be refined and polished until it gleamed. "Probably," Jake said, which was his standard answer to any repair question. His grandfather had taught him that "probably" was the perfect response, optimistic enough to get the job, vague enough to cover your ass. "But it's going to take some time. This thing's operating on principles I've only read about in those physics journals I use to level my workbench. I can pay triple your standard rate." Jake looked up from the navigation core, studying what he could see of her face. Triple rate meant one of 3 things: stolen, illegal, or desperate. Sometimes all 3. "My standard rate's fine," he said, pulling out his tablet to write up an estimate. The tablet's screen was held together with electrical tape, and he had to tap it 3 times before it responded. "I don't do rush jobs for extra pay. Either I fix it right, or I don't fix it at all. That's the Sullivan guarantee." She tilted her head, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of her profile, sharp features, skin that seemed to have a subtle luminescence, like she'd been dusted with the powder they used in those fancy zero-G nightclubs. "You would refuse additional payment?" "Look, lady. Zara. Zara. Nice name. Look, Zara, you know what killed most of the independent repair shops on this station? Greed. They started cutting corners, overcharging, taking bribes to put certain jobs first. Now they're all gone, bought out by Cosmic Repair Incorporated or shut down by lawsuits. He gestured around his cluttered shop, at the walls covered in old licenses, certificates, and a calendar from 2187 that he kept because he liked the picture of Saturn's rings. This place isn't much, but it's mine. And it stays mine because I do honest work for honest pay. That is, unexpected. Yeah, well, the universe is full of surprises. Like this navigation core of yours. 3 days, minimum. Maybe 5 if it keeps trying to exist in multiple dimensions at once. That's going to play hell with my insurance. She produced a credit chip from her cloak, the untraceable kind that corporations used for their less-than-legal transactions. Jake didn't comment on it. Half his customers paid in untraceable credits. The other half paid in promises and IOUs that weren't worth the digital space they occupied. 3 days, she repeated. That is acceptable. Great. I'll need a contact number in case. I will return in 3 days. Before Jake could explain that wasn't how things usually worked, she was already at the door. She moved oddly, too smoothly, like she was gliding rather than walking. He'd seen that kind of movement before, in people who'd grown up in low gravity. Belters, maybe, or one of those fancy orbital habitats where the rich folks lived. Hey, wait, he called out. This thing's not going to, I don't know, explode or anything, right? Because my insurance definitely doesn't cover acts of interdimensional navigation cores. She paused at the doorway, and he could have sworn he heard her laugh, though it sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. It will not explode, she said. Probably. Then she was gone, leaving Jake alone with a piece of technology that was actively defying several laws of physics and making his teeth itch. He looked at it, then at his half-rebuilt Harley engine, then back at the navigation core. Right, he said to the empty shop. Let's see what makes you tick. He reached for his tools, then paused to make himself a cup of coffee. The coffee maker wheezed and groaned, producing something that could generously be called coffee if you'd never actually tasted coffee before. Jake didn't mind. Bad coffee was a tradition in the Sullivan family. His grandfather had always said that good coffee made you soft, made you expect too much from life. As he sipped his terrible coffee and studied the impossible navigation core, Jake failed to notice the small drone hovering outside his shop window, or the way the station's security cameras all seemed to develop convenient blind spots whenever the cloaked woman walked past. He was too busy wondering why the navigation core seemed to hum in harmony with his shop's ventilation system, and why touching it with his multimeter made him briefly smell his grandmother's apple pie, a woman who'd been dead for 20 years and had lived on Earth besides. The core pulsed gently, like a heart made of stars, and Jake Sullivan, completely oblivious to the fact that he was holding a piece of technology worth more than the entire station, rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Jake's first mistake was trying to open the navigation core with a sonic screwdriver. The device immediately turned into what could only be described as an angry disco ball, shooting beams of light in every direction while emitting a sound like a cat being played as a bagpipe. His second mistake was trying to stop it by throwing his shop manual at it. The 300-page tome burst into purple flames the moment it got within a foot of the core, which at least solved his problem of where to store the outdated thing. Okay, Jake said to the now quiet navigation core, which had returned to its gentle pulsing as if nothing had happened. We're going to establish some ground rules. I don't set you on fire, you don't set my stuff on fire. Deal? The core pulsed once, brightly. Jake chose to interpret that as agreement. He spent the next 4 hours just observing it, making notes on his tablet with a stylus he'd made from a repurposed antenna. The core didn't follow any logical pattern he could identify. Its internal structure seemed to rearrange itself every time he looked away, like a quantum mechanical practical joke. The flowing liquid inside moved against gravity, occasionally forming patterns that looked almost like writing, though in no alphabet he recognized. "Computer," Jake said to his shop's AI, which he'd named Bethany after his ex-wife because it was equally unreliable and prone to giving unsolicited advice. "Run a spectral analysis on this thing." Unable to comply, Bethany responded in her perpetually disappointed tone. "The object appears to exist in a quantum superposition of being both here and somewhere else. Also, your coffee maker is on fire." Jake glanced over to see that his coffee maker was indeed producing small flames along with its usual terrible coffee. He grabbed a fire extinguisher, put it out with practiced ease, and returned to the navigation core without missing a beat. Ship repair shops had a saying, "If nothing was on fire, you weren't working hard enough." By hour 6, Jake had made exactly zero progress on actually opening the device, but he had discovered several interesting things. First, it responded to music. Classical made it glow softer, heavy metal made it strobe, and for some reason, playing ancient Earth boy bands made it emit what sounded distinctly like groaning. Second, it was definitely communicating with something. His communications array kept picking up bursts of data whenever the core pulsed, though the data was encrypted in a way that made quantum cryptography look like a children's puzzle. "You're talking to someone, aren't you?" Jake asked the core, setting down his tools. "Phone home kind of thing?" "Let me guess, you're some kind of fancy tracking device, and I'm going to have corporate security breaking down my door any minute." The core remained silent, pulsing steadily. "Bethany, have you ever seen anything like this in your database?" "Searching," Bethany replied. "No matches found. However, I did find 17 recipes for crystallized fruit that share a similar molecular structure. Would you like me to order ingredients?" "Why would I? Never mind." Jake rubbed his eyes. He'd been at this too long. He needed a different approach. That's when he remembered something his grandfather had told him: "Sometimes, boy, the best tool isn't in your toolbox. Sometimes it's in your kitchen." Jake went to his small break room, which was really just a corner with a hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed like it was planning something. He came back with a bottle of hot sauce, a tuning fork he'd been using as a spoon, and oddly enough, a rubber duck he'd found in a salvage haul years ago and kept for reasons he couldn't quite explain. The hot sauce did nothing except make the shop smell like peppers. The tuning fork, however, produced an interesting result. When he struck it and held it near the core, the crystalline surface rippled like water. And the rubber duck, well, the rubber duck was just moral support, but Jake felt better having it there. "Vibrations," he muttered. "It's all about vibrations." He spent the next 2 hours trying different frequencies, using everything from his electric toothbrush to an old subwoofer he'd pulled from a crashed racing pod. Finally, at exactly 432 Hz, a frequency some ancient Earth musicians had claimed was the natural frequency of the universe, the navigation core opened like a flower made of light. Inside was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Jake had ever seen. It looked like someone had taken a star system and miniaturized it, complete with tiny planets orbiting a microscopic sun. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that he recognized the star system. It was Etherian Empire space, 30 light-years away, and according to his star charts, at least 3 of those planets were classified as "approach at your own risk" by the Galactic Transit Authority. "Oh, that's not good," Jake said, then noticed something else. "Wait, is that planet moving backwards?" It was. The third planet in the miniature system was orbiting in reverse, which should have been impossible. Unless... "You're not broken," Jake said to the core. "You're in temporal flux. Someone tried to use you for time navigation, didn't they? That's illegal in, about 40 different systems." The core pulsed, and suddenly Jake's shop filled with holographic displays. Star charts, navigation routes, and what looked like military deployment strategies floated in the air around him. One particular image made him freeze, a royal seal he recognized from a documentary he'd watched about galactic politics. The Etherian Royal House. Bethany, Jake said slowly, what's the penalty for possession of Etherian royal technology? Death, followed by resurrection, followed by death again. The Etherians are very thorough. Great. Cool. Love that for me. Jake waved his hands through the holograms, trying to disperse them, but they kept reforming. Okay, think. Strange woman in expensive cloak brings an impossible navigation core that turns out to be royal Etherian tech. Either she stole it, which means I'm harboring stolen goods, or... He paused, remembering the way she'd moved, that odd liquid grace. The way the air had seemed to shimmer around her. Or she's Etherian herself. The moment he said it out loud, several things clicked into place. The untraceable credits. The refusal to leave contact information. The way she'd said, probably with the exact same intonation he'd used, like she was trying on the word for size. Jake sat down heavily on his work stool, which squeaked in protest. He was either helping a thief or helping Etherian nobility. Either way, he was probably dead if anyone found out. But then he looked at the navigation core, at the temporal flux that was causing the miniature planets to spiral increasingly out of control, and his engineer's pride kicked in. I don't care if you belong to the Emperor of the entire universe, he told the core. You're broken, and I said I'd fix you. Sullivans don't go back on their word. He pulled up his sleeves, grabbed his modified scanner, and got back to work. The temporal flux was the key issue. The core was trying to exist in multiple time streams simultaneously, which was causing it to. Wait. Jake suddenly laughed. I know exactly what you need. He ran to his storage room, dodging past boxes of spare parts and stepping over a cleaning robot that had been, temporarily, deactivated for 3 years. In the very back, covered in dust and regret, was a box labeled Earth Antiques, Do Not Sell, Unless Rent is Due. Inside, among vinyl records and a Nintendo console that probably belonged in a museum, was a perfectly preserved Sony Walkman from 1984. Magnetic tape, Jake said, grinning like he'd just discovered faster-than-light travel. Analog storage in a digital universe. You can't exist in multiple time streams if you're locked to a linear playback mechanism. It was either brilliant or the stupidest idea he'd ever had. Given his track record, it was probably both. As he began the delicate process of integrating 20th-century Earth technology with something that could navigate through time and space, Jake failed to notice the figure watching from across the station through a high-powered scope. Zara stood in her rented hab unit, her holographic disguise flickering slightly from the strain of maintaining it for so long. Her companion, currently shaped like a particularly judgmental cat, sat on the windowsill. He's actually doing it, she murmured in Etherian, watching Jake work with an intensity that had nothing to do with royal bearing and everything to do with genuine curiosity. He's fixing it with, is that a music player? The cat-shaped being responded with a sound that might have been approval or might have been disdain. With shapeshifters, it was always hard to tell. Back in the shop, Jake connected the Walkman to the navigation core using a combination of quantum couplers, rubber bands, and what might have been optimism. The moment the magnetic tape began to play, side A of The Best of Earth's 1980s, a mixtape he'd made in a fit of nostalgia, the navigation core's chaotic pulsing smoothed into a steady rhythm. Bethany, Jake said, watching the miniature planets slowly align into proper orbits, remind me to patent this. Patent filed. It has been rejected for violating 17 laws of physics and at least 3 laws of common sense. Sounds about right. Jake reached for his coffee, remembered it was still slightly on fire, and decided he'd earned something stronger. Tomorrow he'd finish the repairs. Tonight, he'd try not to think about the fact that he was probably committing treason against an empire he'd never even visited. The navigation core pulsed in time with the music, and somewhere in the miniature star system, tiny planets danced to the rhythm of Earth's greatest hits. 3 days had passed, and Jake was admiring his handiwork with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for parents watching their kids graduate or mechanics seeing an engine purr after months of work. The navigation corps sat on his workbench, humming contentedly while Take On Me played through the integrated Walkman on repeat. He'd added a few personal touches, fuzzy dice hanging from a quantum coupler that somehow helped with spatial orientation, a cup holder attachment that defied at least 3 laws of thermodynamics, and his masterpiece, a voice modulator that made all navigation announcements sound like a 1950s radio announcer. "Turn left at the nebula, space cats and kittens," the corps announced in a smooth baritone when Jake ran a test sequence. "You're approaching your destination in style." "Perfect," Jake said, then frowned at the door. His mysterious client was late. Not fashionably late, but the kind of late that usually meant someone had either been arrested or had decided to skip the station without paying. Given that this was Etherian tech, arrest seemed more likely. He was just considering whether to hide the core in his special compartment, the one behind the poster of the 2195 Miss Mars that no security officer had ever thought to check, when the door burst open so forcefully it knocked his "open" sign off its last remaining screw. Sorry. Zara rushed in, her cloak billowing dramatically despite the complete absence of wind in the climate-controlled shop. There were complications. Complications like "I forgot my wallet" or complications like "the station is about to explode"? Jake asked, already reaching for his emergency go-bag out of habit. Somewhere between those two extremes. She pushed her hood back to catch her breath, and that's when Jake's hand, reaching for a cloth to polish the navigation core one last time, knocked directly into her head. The hood fell completely away, and there they were, elegant, elongated ears that tapered to delicate points, nothing like human ears at all. For a moment, they both stood frozen. Zara's hand flew to her ears, her eyes, definitely not human eyes, Jake realized now, they had flecks of gold that moved like tiny galaxies, widened in what was unmistakably panic. Jake's response was to smack his forehead so hard it echoed through the shop. "Oh crud, you're Etherian." He immediately went to his diagnostic tablet, scrolling frantically. "I should have used a different coolant. Your species runs at a baseline temperature of what, 2.3 degrees higher than human normal. The quantum stabilizers I used are calibrated for human perception ranges." He grabbed the core, examining it with renewed concern. "Do Etherians see in the extended UV spectrum? Because if so, the display modifications I made are going to look like garbage." "Wait, can you even hear the radio announcer voice? What's your auditory range?" Zara's carefully prepared response, she'd practiced 17 different scenarios for if her identity was discovered, ranging from bribery to temporary memory modification, died on her lips. "You're concerned about species-appropriate modifications?" "Well, yeah." Jake was already pulling up new schematics on his tablet. "Look, I pride myself on customer satisfaction. If I'd known you were Etherian, I would have used beryllium copper alloys instead of titanium steel. Your people's electromagnetic fields react better to beryllium. It's like basic Xenotech 101. He paused, looking up at her with genuine distress. "I haven't voided any warranties, have I? I know how strict Etherian manufacturers are about their warranty policies." Zara found herself at a complete loss. "There is no warranty." "Oh good, because let me tell you, I once accidentally voided a Rigelian warranty by using the wrong shade of blue paint. Apparently navy and midnight navy are critically different to their optical sensors, and they sent a legal team that spoke exclusively in rhyming couplets. Do you have any idea how annoying it is to be sued in limerick form? Despite everything, the danger, the fear of discovery, the weight of an empire on her shoulders, Zara laughed. It was a real laugh, not the practiced tinkling sound she'd been trained to produce at court functions, but something genuine that started in her chest and bubbled up like champagne. "You're not going to report me?" "To who?" Jake gestured vaguely at the station beyond his shop walls. "Station security. Those guys couldn't find their own rear ends with both hands and a detailed map. The Galactic Authority. They still owe me for fixing their patrol ship last month." He set the navigation core down carefully. Besides, you paid in advance. That makes you a customer, and I've got customer confidentiality. It's written right there on the wall. Zara looked where he was pointing. Indeed, there was a sign, hand-painted and slightly crooked, that read, "What happens in Sullivan stays in Sullivan's, unless it's literally on fire, in which case please tell someone." That's not legally binding, she said. Yeah, but it's morally binding, which is way more important. Jake went back to his tablet, making notes. So, Etherian. That explains why the core was using those weird quantum signatures. Your people navigate by probability clouds rather than fixed coordinates, right? Man, I wish I'd known that before I spent 6 hours trying to lock down the positional matrices. You know about Etherian navigation methods? I read a lot, Jake said, which was true. His shop was filled with technical manuals, scientific journals, and an impressive collection of what he called professional development materials, but were actually science fiction novels. Plus, I fixed an Etherian coffee maker once. You people make everything unnecessarily complicated. Did you know your coffee makers have 17 settings just for temperature? 17. Coffee should be hot. That's it. That's the setting. Zara found herself moving closer to the workbench, drawn by his enthusiasm. Show me what you did to repair it. Oh, you're going to love this. Jake's face lit up like a kid showing off a school project. So the main problem was temporal flux. Someone tried to use this baby for time navigation, didn't they? Naughty, naughty. That's illegal in most civilized systems and Detroit. Detroit? Old Earth joke. Anyway, look at this. He activated the core, and it projected its holographic interface. See how smooth the probability clouds are now? That's because I integrated an analog playback system. Can't exist in multiple time streams when you're locked to linear time by good old magnetic tape. You fix temporal flux with human music storage. The best of Earth's 1980s, specifically. Side A has some absolute bangers. Want to hear Africa by Toto? It makes the navigation system 12% more efficient for some reason I absolutely cannot explain. Zara stared at him, then at the navigation core, then back at him. You're insane. Probably. But it works, doesn't it? He ran a diagnostic, and the results showed perfectly synchronized quantum states across all 17 dimensions the core operated in. Plus, check this out. He pressed a button, and the cup holder extended with a soft whir. For those long interstellar journeys. That's completely unnecessary. All the best things are. Oh, and the fuzzy dice. They're not just decorative. Jake flicked one of them, and it began glowing with a soft blue light. They're actually quantum probability indicators. Blue means safe passage, red means danger, and if they turn plaid, you should probably turn around immediately. Plaid isn't a color, it's a pattern. Not in quantum space it isn't. Zara shook her head, but she was smiling. It had been so long since she'd smiled genuinely that her face almost hurt from the unfamiliar expression. You are the strangest human I have ever encountered. Thanks. I think. Wait, how many humans have you encountered? Including you? 1. Oh. Well, then I'm also the best human you've encountered. Logic. Jake made finger guns at her, immediately regretted it, and tried to play it off as stretching. There was a comfortable silence as Zara examined the navigation core, running her fingers over the modifications with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The Walkman integration should have been absurd, but somehow it was elegant in its simplicity. I should tell you, she said quietly, not looking at him, I am not just Etherian. Oh God, are you also part Zephyrin? Because their dietary requirements are a nightmare. I dated a half Zephyrin once, and she could only eat foods that were perfect squares. Do you know how hard it is to make square spaghetti? No, she stopped, turned to face him fully. I am Queen Zara Thys of the Etherian Empire. Jake's tablet slipped from his fingers and clattered on the floor. He stared at her for a long moment, processing this information with the same methodical approach he used for complex repairs. So, he said slowly, should I have offered you better coffee? Because all I have is the instant stuff, and now I feel like a terrible host. Do queens drink instant coffee? Is that allowed? There's probably a law about it. Oh God, did I commit treason by giving you substandard coffee? Zara blinked. Your primary concern is the quality of coffee you didn't actually offer me. Well, yeah. My grandmother would rise from her grave and hit me with a spatula if she knew I'd served instant coffee to royalty. She was very particular about hospitality. Once made me rewash all the dishes because the Pope of Ganymede was visiting the station and she wanted everything to be perfect just in case he stopped by. He didn't, but that's not the point. You are the strangest human in existence. We've established that. But seriously, Your Majesty, do I bow? I'm not good at bowing. Bad knees. I could curtsy, but I've never actually learned how. Please don't curtsy. Thank God. Jake picked up his tablet, brushed off some imaginary dust, and pulled up his invoice. So, about payment. Do I bill the Empire, or? Zara laughed again, and this time it didn't sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. It sounded like a person who'd forgotten what it was like to be treated normally, finally remembering. The payment I gave you is sufficient. Cool. Cool. So, why is the Queen of the Etherian Empire getting her navigation core fixed in the worst repair shop on the worst level of a station that once got voted most likely to explode 3 years running? It's a long story. Jake glanced at his wall clock, which was running backwards because he'd fixed it wrong and decided he liked it better that way. I've got time. Also, I should probably know if there's going to be a fleet of warships showing up to arrest me for touching royal property. There might be, Zara admitted. But not for touching the navigation core. Oh good. Wait, what? Jake poured the instant coffee with the solemnity of a ritual, adding precisely 2 sugars to Zara's cup because she looked like a 2-sugar person. His grandmother's ghost would have to deal with the instant coffee situation. They sat in his cluttered back office, which was really just a corner with 2 mismatched chairs and a table made from a repurposed blast door. So, Jake said, settling into his chair, which groaned like it was offering commentary, you're telling me you ran away from your wedding? It was a very expensive steak. Still. Jake shook his head. So what's your plan? Keep running. Because I've got to tell you, those coveralls are yours if you want them, but the smell doesn't wash out. Zara was quiet for a moment, studying the navigation core that still sat on Jake's workbench, humming along to Don't Stop Believin' on repeat. I need to reclaim my throne, she said finally. Not for power, but because my people deserve better than skull fountains and third-person narration. There are loyal forces in the outer colonies, people who remember when the Empire stood for exploration and knowledge, not conquest and intimidation. Sounds like you need a fleet. I need many things. A secure base of operations. Reliable technology. Ships that don't announce themselves with unnecessary Gothic architecture. She paused, looking at him with those gold-flecked eyes. I need people I can trust. Jake felt the weight of that look. I'm just a mechanic. You're a mechanic who fixed impossible technology with a 40-year-old music player. Who treated me exactly the same after learning I was a queen as you did when you thought I was just another customer. Who just convinced Vextor's personal guard that the Queen of the Etherian Empire was your incompetent apprentice. To be fair, you sold that pretty well. Where did you learn those curse words? Your bathroom wall is very educational. Jake laughed, then grew serious. Zara, I can't fight an empire. I fix things. That's what I do. That's exactly what I need. She moved closer, and Jake noticed she smelled like ozone and wildflowers even through the lingering engine oil. My fleet needs someone who can keep it running. Someone who understands that the best solution isn't always the most expensive one. Someone who values honest work over political gain. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a partnership. You help me reclaim my throne and reform the empire, and I'll help you expand your business across the galaxy. Imagine it, Sullivan Salvage and Repair, now with locations in 12-star systems. Jake looked around his dingy shop, at the walls covered in outdated certifications and the ceiling that leaked something purple every time it rained on the station's upper levels. It wasn't much, but it was his. I have conditions, he said. Of course. 1. I'm not calling you, Your Majesty. You're Zara in the shop, Queen Zara in formal situations, and, hey you with the fancy ears when you're being annoying. Zara's lips twitched. Acceptable. 2. No skull fountains. Ever. If we win and you redecorate with anyone's remains, I'm out. Agreed. They're terribly unsanitary anyway. 3. We're partners. Equal say in decisions that affect the business. You handle the royal stuff, I handle the fixing stuff, and we both handle the not getting killed by Prince third person stuff. Deal. And 4, Jake held up his finger. We get a better coffee maker. I'm not overthrowing an empire on instant coffee. That's your most important condition. Have you met me? Zara extended her hand, long fingers elegant even without royal rings. Partners? Jake looked at her hand, then at the navigation core still cheerfully playing Earth's greatest hits, then at the woman who'd walked into his shop as a mysterious customer and was walking out as, what? A friend? A business partner? A revolutionary co-conspirator? He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. Partners. But I'm warning you, I'm keeping the fuzzy dice on every ship's navigation system. I wouldn't have it any other way. Their handshake was interrupted by Bethany's voice. The Crimson Nebula forces are departing. Also, that guard's shoulder joint just seized completely. He's stuck in a perpetual salute position. Called it, Jake said proudly. Over the next hour, they planned. Jake pulled up star charts on his ancient display, marking supply routes and friendly ports. Zara shared intelligence about loyal forces, drawing elaborate battle plans on napkins because Jake's holographic projector only worked if you hit it exactly right and neither of them could find the sweet spot. We'll need a base of operations, Zara said, adding another napkin to their growing pile of strategic planning. Somewhere Vextor won't think to look. I know a place. There's an old mining station in the Forgotten Reaches. Nobody goes there because the whole system smells like eggs. Sulfur mining, you know. But the facilities are solid, and I know a guy who knows a guy who owes me for fixing his mother's prosthetic leg. You fixed a prosthetic leg? It's basically just engineering with more ethical constraints. As they planned, something shifted in Jake's shop. It wasn't physical, the walls were still grimy, the ceiling still leaked purple, and the coffee maker still produced what could generously be called a hot brown liquid. But there was an energy now, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there since his grandfather had passed. You know, Jake said, marking another sympathetic system on their map, this morning I was rebuilding a Harley engine just to feel like I was fixing something that made sense. Now I'm planning to help overthrow a skull fountain enthusiast with an alien queen who's wearing my spare coveralls. Are you having second thoughts? Jake looked at her, really looked at her. Not at the queen or the fugitive or the alien, but at Zara, who laughed at his bad jokes and got genuinely excited about unnecessary cup holders. Nah, he said, turning back to their plans. But we're definitely getting that coffee maker first. I know a guy on Proxima Station who sells the ones that can make 17 different temperatures. You're going to love it. I don't need 17 temperatures for coffee. But you could have them. That's the beauty of excessive engineering. Zara shook her head, but she was smiling. You're going to be a terrible influence on Imperial efficiency. The worst, Jake agreed cheerfully. Now, let's talk about adding racing stripes to your royal fleet. Purely for aerodynamics in space, which makes no sense, but looks awesome. As the station lights dimmed for the artificial night cycle, Jake Sullivan and Queen Zara Thys of the Etherian Empire sat in a cluttered repair shop, planning a revolution over instant coffee and napkin blueprints. It wasn't how either of them had expected their day to go, but somehow, it felt exactly right. The navigation core hummed along to, "We are the champions," and if that wasn't a sign, Jake didn't know what was. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small workshop where a mechanic and a queen were about to change the galaxy, one honest repair at a time. Was not merely a wedding, Zara corrected, wrapping her fingers around the mug. The heat didn't seem to bother her despite the coffee being approximately the temperature of a small sun. It was a political alliance with Prince Vextor of the Crimson Nebula. He collects the heads of his enemies and uses them as decorative fountains. Tacky. That's what I said. But apparently pointing out the feng shui problems with skull fountains is not considered appropriate wedding planning input. Jake snorted into his coffee. Let me guess, he's the type who has a throne made of weapons and thinks subtle is a type of pastry. He literally has a throne made of weapons. It's tremendously uncomfortable and makes this horrible scraping sound whenever he sits down. Zara shuddered. And he insists on narrating his own actions. Vextor enters the room majestically. Vextor surveys his domain with cruel satisfaction. It's exhausting. Oh, he's one of those. Jake nodded sagely. I fixed a ship for a guy like that once. Kept referring to himself as the destroyer even though he sold insurance. Good customer though. Always paid on time. The marriage would have united our empires and prevented a war, Zara continued, her voice growing quieter. My counsel insisted it was for the greater good. But I couldn't. I couldn't spend eternity with someone who thinks decimation is a reasonable response to incorrect coffee orders. See, that's just wasteful. Good baristas are hard to find. Jake leaned back, his chair tilting at a dangerous angle. So you took your navigation core and ran? The core contains the location of every strategic defense point in the Empire. I couldn't leave it behind for Vextor to eventually claim. She took a sip of coffee and made a face that suggested instant coffee transcended species in its awfulness. I thought if I could reach the outer systems, I could rally the colonial forces who remember when the throne stood for more than political marriages and skull fountains. Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm Jake had never heard before, mainly because he disconnected most of his security systems to save on power bills. Bethany's voice filled the shop, somehow managing to sound both bored and panicked. 3 Crimson Nebula destroyers have just exited hyperspace. They appear to be scanning for Etherian biosignatures. Also, your rental on the industrial printer is overdue. Priorities, Bethany. Jake jumped up, peering out the grimy window. Sure enough, 3 ships that looked like someone had weaponized a Gothic cathedral were positioning themselves around the station. Those are some aggressive-looking ships. Vextor values intimidation over efficiency, Zara said, standing as well. Her hands were steady, but Jake noticed the way her elongated ears drooped slightly, what he was beginning to recognize as Etherian anxiety. They'll scan the entire station. My biodampener only works at a distance. Right. Okay. I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it. 5 minutes later, Zara was wearing Jake's spare coveralls, which were baggy on her slender frame and smelled like a combination of engine oil and whatever the opposite of hope was. He'd wrapped her head in a bandana that advertised Big Eddie's Bait and Tackle, we also fix quantum drives, and covered her elegant features with safety goggles that had one lens missing. I look ridiculous, she said, catching her reflection in a piece of polished metal. You look like a mechanic's apprentice who makes bad life choices. It's perfect. Jake handed her a wrench. Here, hold this. Look surly. Mechanics are always surly. It's part of the union contract. The door to the shop chimed. Jake had fixed it an hour ago out of boredom, and 3 figures in elaborate armor entered. Prince Vextor's personal guard, judging by the skull motifs and the way they had to turn sideways to fit through the door. Vextor's guards enter the establishment with menacing intent, the lead guard announced, apparently having picked up his master's narrative habit. They seek an Etherian fugitive. Yeah. Well, Jake seeks paying customers who don't speak in third person, but we can't all get what we want. Jake didn't look up from the engine part he was pretending to work on. This is a repair shop. If you're not here to fix something, you're trespassing. The guard's hand went to his weapon. You dare. Actually, the second guard interrupted, looking at a smoking panel on his armor, my suit's been making this weird noise. Like a grinding but also kind of a whistle. Jake's professional instincts kicked in. Grinding and whistling. That's a misaligned servo in your joint actuators. Probably the left shoulder, right? Gets worse when you raise your arm. The guard raised his arm experimentally. The armor produced a sound like a cat being fed through a blender backwards. That's your problem right there. Your manufacturer used Proxima-grade bearings in Earth-grade housing. Different thermal expansion rates. Jake grabbed his scanner. I can fix it, but it'll cost you. I don't do mates rates for people who threaten me. We're searching for a fugitive, the lead guard insisted, though he was now looking at his own armor with concern, probably wondering if it had the same problem. Etherian female, about this tall, the third guard added, holding his hand at approximately Zara's height. Considered extremely dangerous. Jake laughed. Dangerous? Here. Buddy, the most dangerous thing in this sector is the sushi from the level 3 food court. Last Etherian I saw was probably, actually, you're the first aliens I've seen all week. Business has been slow. Zara chose that moment to drop her wrench with a clatter that would have been suspicious if she hadn't followed it up with a string of profanity that Jake hadn't even known existed. She'd learned it from the graffiti in his bathroom and was pronouncing half of it wrong, but the guards didn't seem to notice. Is that your apprentice? The lead guard asked, his helmet sensors focusing on Zara. Unfortunately. Jake sighed dramatically. Kid can't tell a hyperspanner from a hydrospanner. Yesterday she tried to fix a navigation unit with a hammer. A hammer. Can you believe it? I can hear you, Zara growled, staying in character with an enthusiasm that suggested she was enjoying this. You're supposed to be fixing the waste recycler, Jake shot back. Unless you want to explain to our next customer why the bathroom smells like a Rigelian swamp. The lead guard's helmet swiveled between them, his sensors trying to penetrate the combination of grease, poor lighting, and what Jake called ambient chaos that permeated his shop. Finally, the guard made a disgusted sound. The fugitive would never lower herself to such degrading work. Vextor's guards exit with disdain, the lead guard announced, backing toward the door. They continue their search elsewhere. Hey! Jake called after them. What about your armor repair? We'll come back, the second guard said, still prodding at his squealing shoulder joint. After they left, Jake and Zara stood in silence for a moment. Then Zara pulled off the safety goggles and laughed. Really laughed, bending over and clutching her sides. Did you see his face when you offered to fix his armor? She gasped. He looked so conflicted. They'll be back, Jake said, grinning. That grinding's only going to get worse. I give it an hour before that shoulder joint completely seizes up. They returned to the back office, where Zara shed the coveralls with obvious relief. She stood there in her original clothes, looking somehow smaller without the cloak, more person than queen.